It's always very difficult, as you've just heard, to do justice to very complex and rich discussions. Fortunately, unlike the challenge that David Beckman faced in trying to summarize an entire country's experience in an hour and a half, or 4 countries' experiences, the session that I'm reporting on dealt with 4 program interventions, which were at a much more micro level. But as we heard from the presenters, all were undertaken with the notion of scaling up, of replication and scaling up and moving on. So So we, in fact, have organized our feedback in sort of looking at the what we talked about, and then addressing a couple of questions about the how, the lessons about how to do this best, and then identifying a couple of the remaining challenges with regard to scaling up and filling in gaps in knowledge. The what is pretty clear. We had 4 interventions, 2 having to do with community-based interventions, specifically focused on nutrition improvement, 1 focused on introducing animal source foods as a way of nutrition improvement, but also directly addressing poverty. And then a 4th case focusing on the program interventions which were part of the national vision in Brazil of realizing the commitment of the right to food, and basically talking mostly about school feeding. We saw that clearly there were different scales from community to national scales involved. We saw that there were different program goals and different impact pathways. The 1,000 days focus of the program led by Concern Worldwide in Zambia, which is very much focusing on the first 1,000 days of life. The Ghana case of ENAM, increasing consumption of animal source food, and the commercialization and access to markets. All of the cases, all of the program interventions, I think it's important to note, were driven by previous experience of the implementing partners. In many cases, the partners were refining approaches that had been tested and sort of experienced before. But in the case particularly of the program in Zambia called RAIN, which is being carried out with the leadership of Concern Worldwide, there really is a more exploratory approach with the intention of building new evidence. It's important to note that 2 of the cases, 2 of the program interventions, and the teams include IFPRI researchers for the express purpose of learning while doing, but also building an evidence base with regard to the relationship between agriculture, nutrition, and health. Again, there were some commonalities. All of the efforts emphasized empowering and engaging women, particularly in women and local participants. In the case of Brazil with school feeding, the emphasis has been on local procurement of food for the programs. But in the other 3 program interventions, it was very clear that virtually front and center was the objective of empowering and engaging women. The integrated approach in all cases included different sectors, different delivery systems, but in fact a convergence of interests of a broad group of stakeholders. On how, we heard a couple of important commonalities. The inclusion of the diversity of local and national partners was important, not just to sort of get everybody to know about the program and to participate, but really, and this was emphasized by all the speakers, to ensure that the definition of the problem that was being addressed, or the challenge that was being addressed, was right, and that the impact pathway that was envisioned was in fact going to lead to the expected impact. They also talked about the importance of understanding the context for problem solving, moving, for example, a very successful program that Helen Keller International is leading in Asia to environments in West Africa, a very different context and very much of a need for assessment, analysis, fine-tuning, refining, based on experience, but taking into account the new context. We also, all of the speakers emphasized that the inclusiveness of the programs with regard to participants from a variety of sectors was critical to both the replicability and the sustainability of the effort. In sum, I think all speakers emphasized the importance of monitoring and evaluation for learning, number one, but also for advocacy, to sort of fix those outstanding problems which were there. Particularly Brazil actually enacted a law in response to the perceived need to involve local producers in the production of food for the school feeding program. And the last point was having one partner that focused specifically on the evidence, the learning, and the monitoring and evaluation. And in 2 cases, IFPRI. I'm out of time, but there are a number of gaps in knowledge that were brought up: the complexity of women's lives, the water challenge, which is more constraining in Africa than in Asia, and identification of nutritional gaps in local diets and using local biodiversity to address these. Thank you.